There are over 5 billion podcasts in the world, and over 500 million people listen to them. But getting your podcast in front of those people, that's a challenge, isn't it? How should you promote your podcast or your client's podcast? And how are you supposed to position and frame your podcast so that it drives actual business results? Well, that's what we're covering in today's episode of The Martech Show.
The past is gone. Now is the future.
This is The Martech Show, exploring today's marketing technology solutions. Social media, artificial intelligence, augmented reality.
Now is the future.
Content, SEO, email, analytics, listening, advertising, and more. I'm your host, Mike Alton, and I'm joined by agency owner and technology futurist Robin Diamond. Each episode explores the latest developments in marketing technology and shares new solutions and innovative approaches that you need to know about to grow your business today. And now, the rest of today's episode. Welcome back to the Martech Show, where Robin and I get to dish on what's shiny and new in the Martech space, then do a deep dive into a specific platform or solution that can help you in your business today. Robin, how are you doing?
Fantastic. Thank you.
So excited to have you. And we've got a bit of a puzzling development from LinkedIn to talk about today. The network, known for being serious and professional, is now apparently going after the complete opposite crowd and adding games and puzzles. And while this might feel like Facebook circa 2014 and maybe even an early April Fool's joke, LinkedIn did confirm the upcoming capability to TechCrunch, saying, "We're playing with adding puzzle-based games within the LinkedIn experience to unlock a bit of fun, deepen relationships, and hopefully spark the opportunity for conversations." What do you think, Robin? Is this a genius move, or does it feel more like LinkedIn has jumped the shark?
I feel like they jumped. What happened, Mike? Like, this is the only platform that, I mean, it's fun. I love connecting. We have a great partnership on there, but what are they doing? I mean, I don't know how you feel. We haven't talked about this behind the scenes, but like it's become very salesy lately. And now it's like they're going, like, you're right, they're going back like circa 2014 of like, hey, we're Facebook. And we're like, no, we're not. It's a way to connect, but in a deeper level. I hate the sales part too. I don't know what's going on. Mike, maybe you can weigh in.
No, I just feel like this is development time that could have been spent in so many better ways. I liked Facebook's stories or LinkedIn stories format. I wish they wouldn't have got rid of that, and I would have seen them bringing that back or doing something more on the community space and reinvesting in that part of the platform. This feels strange to me.
I guess maybe the question they should have asked is ask us. Like, ask us what
Maybe.
we would love to see. Like, we talk about this all the time. We talk about relationships. Just put it out there. Tell us what you need. LinkedIn, ask us what you need, and we would tell you it is not games. 100%. We do not have time to play games on LinkedIn.
No. So those of you watching, let us know what you think. We have a comment from Sarah Scott who says, "Seems off brand. I feel like anytime LinkedIn tries to be like everyone else, they
Yes.
miss the mark." That is something strange about that too, right? It's always got to be a little different there, and not always in a good way. Thanks for sharing that, Sarah. So everyone, feel free to chime in the comments. Let us know what you think about LinkedIn and their puzzles. But let's talk podcasting. Brands continue to lean into podcasting as a marketing channel. Here to Pulse, we are the Martech Show. It's a live webinar. Then use that to power a podcast. And we're in the process of launching 3 iterations of the Social Pulse podcast. Other brands like Adobe and HubSpot and Review have formed entire podcast networks. They're thinking like media companies, as Joe Pulizzi would say, and they're finding new avenues of distribution and new measurements of success. How? Well, that's exactly what Deirdre Tshien is going to talk to us about. She's a serial entrepreneur who lives and breathes content marketing, particularly podcasting, having authored Honey Trap Marketing and hosted the Grow My Podcast show. Deirdre is a 2023 honoree of the 100 Women to Know in America and has co-founded Capsho, an AI-powered content marketing solution that helps businesses and creators leverage their content to amplify their message, grow their listeners, and build their movements. Hey, Deirdre, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me on here.
So happy to have you. Now, right off the bat, let's get into what Capsho does for marketers, whether they're creating podcasts or video content. What's it about?
Yes. So we're in I think I mentioned to you, Mike and Robin, that we're in this really weird time where we're actually about to launch a whole new Capsho Next Gen. So I'm going to talk about what current Capsho does, and then where it is that we see Next Gen coming, which is going to be literally imminently in a few weeks' time. So currently, Capsho basically ingests, audio or video. As long as there's spoken word in it, Capsho takes that and it creates a whole host of content marketing assets. So everything from your title and description to social media captions for all of the different social media platforms, emails, LinkedIn articles, blog posts. It identifies sound bites. It pulls out quotes. It writes short form video scripts. Like, it does a ton of things. And what we realized unknowingly was that we were really overwhelming people. It kind of, if I were to tell you my story, I think a lot of people would vibe with it because it's a common one. I started a coaching business, 4 years ago. That was when I had my first podcast. And it was through that journey that I was like, I'm creating content, but no one's discovering it. No one's really listening to it. It's not really doing the thing that it was meant to do. And so whenever I talk to anyone else who is trying to have their audience do something, take action, there's a difference between creating content for content's sake and creating content to actually get a result. And that's kind of where we're transitioning Capsho to really address. And that's what's coming with Capsho Next Gen. So, I think when we spoke about why is it that podcasts shouldn't just repurpose their content, it's because of this. It's this nuance or this difference that comes from, are we creating content for content's sake, and why are we creating content, and how do we actually create content that's actually going to drive outcomes and results? So happy to dive into that, but that's kind of what Capsho does.
Thanks.
I think that's amazing. And I love, from being an agency that's doing a podcast itself to Mike and I working on this podcast, there's so many questions that come to mind right now. And I think the first one is really whether creating podcast or video content, what are you supposed to do? How do you start?
With the actual creation?
Yeah.
Holy smokes, this is a big one.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's a question. I guess if we talk to, entrepreneurs, right? People who have businesses, I think the great thing about any of us is that we have this message that is burning inside of us that we just need to share. And it breaks my heart every time I speak to someone who, for whatever reason, they get held back from actually starting that podcast or that YouTube channel or whatever it is that they want, because of all of the, I don't know if you guys went through this, but when I first started, I found every reason to procrastinate. I was like, I don't have the right microphone, and I don't have the right lighting, and I don't have, the background and all the things, right? And we do this to ourselves because I think we're procrastinating. We're just letting all these little excuses actually hold us back from, just, as you said, just getting started and creating content. And when I realized that was happening to me, I was like, no, I'm not going to let that happen. I think Mike saw, my original background. So I know when I hopped on, Robin, you were like, this background is amazing. And it is. We actually only did this over in December of last year. So what's that, 3 months ago? But for the longest time, I just had a plain white background. And it was frankly super boring and ugly. And the thing is that, we can't let that stuff stop us. We have to lean into, well, we're all, every one of us, here for a reason. We started a business for a reason, whether that's because we're passionate about something and or because we're passionate about helping our audience and our clients with something. And that content has to get out there. And for me, I've kind of seen 3 broad areas where we can really let our content shine, no matter what it is, no matter what type of creator we are. So there's, the expert superpower, which is essentially like, hey, I know what it is I'm talking about. I have my own frameworks and strategies. I'm an expert and I'm going to share that, right? So that's one type of superpower that, a ton of, especially coaches and consultants and service providers, they have this superpower, right? They are an expert. They know their stuff and they can just literally turn on a microphone, turn on a camera, even if it's on your phone, and just talk about what it is that they are so good at, right? Like what is that expertise? So that's one superpower. The second superpower is, this is more where I lean. It's being a curator. And it's like, I have this overall strategy, but I cannot profess to be an expert in every single piece of it, because every single piece of it is in and of itself an expert area. And so I actually love finding people who have that expertise and I can nerd out with them on a podcast or on a live stream and really, get to know what it is that they love sharing with their audience and with their clients. And then the third superpower, I call that the investigator. And this is where, no matter what the topic is, it's really about the person. It's really about the guest that the investigator gets on. And what they are so good at, which I wish I was better at this, is, doing the research up front to be like, okay, this is really, what this person loves talking about. But hey, what is a different perspective or a different way that I can actually get them to share about things so that it's not the norm? We're actually investing, we're going deeper into something that they haven't maybe ever shared before. And so those are three broad content superpowers that I always go, if you can figure out which one you fit into, then actually pressing record is so much easier because you can just lean straight into that. You can just be like, yep, I'm an expert. I'm just going to talk about the thing that, I'm a curator. I just need to find really great guests that fit into my framework that my audience is going to want to hear from, or I'm an investigator and, X, Y, Z. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, Robin, but that's always where I start. Like what is your content superpower?
It not only answered my question, it gave me so I was like, wait, what is my superpower? I need to know this. I wrote it down. I was like, what is my superpower? I love that.
Yeah, I couldn't relate more to a lot of the things that you were saying. And you talked about procrastinating, getting started. I know for me, I'm a bit of a perfectionist and I hate the idea of starting something and not doing it well, like really, really well right from the start, even though that's a foolish approach. And you talked about being an investigator. That's what we're going to do right now, because we want to drill down. And I want to go back to something you mentioned before that you just kind of flew right by. And it was the whole topic of the show that we shouldn't repurpose our podcast content. Tell us again, why exactly shouldn't I repurpose all this content? Because that's what my CEO wants me to do. And I'm going to get in trouble if I don't. And what should we be doing instead?
Yes. Okay. So this kind of goes back to, the whole idea of creating content for content's sake. So, okay. So when we first launched Capsho, so we launched over 18 months ago now. It was before, ChatGPT. It was before the hype of AI. And at the time when we launched, it was, we did the thing, and I think you guys talked about this with the LinkedIn, where we spoke to people. And one of the first conferences that we went to was actually Podfest. We were actually invited to go, and we just spoke to a ton of podcasters about what it was that they were struggling with. We had an idea because, as you know, I'm a content marketing nerd. And so for me, I knew that I wanted to bring, content marketing to life. But the more that we spoke to podcasters, the more they were like, oh my gosh, if you can just solve, the whole show notes thing, like title and description, that would be a lifesaver, because that was the number one burning problem they had. And so that's what we did. So for the first iteration of Capsho, we launched first of all with we'll just give you your show notes. And then we started to build it out in terms of, we'll help you, we know that you want to promote your podcast episode. So we'll help you with that, that copy and, with the email and things like that. And then, ChatGPT and AI became like this massive thing. And when I looked at the space, I was like, oh my gosh, what I see happening is I call it the content vomit, on the internet, where now creating content just becomes so easy because we have access to AI and these tools that literally anyone can kind of almost be that expert or be, whatever it is that they want on social media. And I was like, we had to really look at what it was that we were doing and how do we not, play into that content vomit space. We are powered by AI. And so it seemed a little bit counterintuitive to, how I was thinking to what it was that we were building. And so, and what that meant and looked like was, because I don't know if you've ever, I've repurposed my podcast before, and repurposing to me was like, okay, how do I, before it was like audiograms. It was all about the audiograms, right? Like, how do I create really simple audiograms, put that out there? And then I was creating posts of like, episode just dropped, those kind of posts. And which, by the way, got no engagement. Like, no one wanted to see those. And then I was like, okay, well, what if I just like clipped really short videos, and shared that? And the problem with that is that no one if people are following you, they don't really either know or care about what my guests was saying, because they're like, who is this random person on my feed now? So it was starting to turn my audience off. And so when and this is, I think I mentioned to you, Katie. So I started talking to Katie Brinkley. So she, from Next Step Social Communications, she's a social media expert, and she was taking me through her strategy, her 4-post strategy. And I was telling her, I was like, I'm having this issue of like, I do not want to just create content for content's sake. I do not think that the way that we are repurposing our podcast is doing what it needs to do. And she was like, hey, well, what do you need social media to do? And I was like, well, I guess, to begin with, I want more listeners on the podcast. But even more than that, how do I grow my email list? Because, I'm greedy. So I'm like, I want all these things. I want more people on my email list, and I want more clients and definitely more users into Capsho and things like that. And she was like, okay, well, let's like, I had to kind of like throw out all of my previous ideas about social media and what it was there for. And she started talking me through how we should be looking at social media. And I don't know about you, but before I used to hear all the time, like, social media, you have to be social on social media, right? Like, has anyone else heard this? Like, yes. Be social on social media. And I was like, I don't know what in the world that means. Like, what does that actually mean? And it was only when Katie started breaking down her 4-post strategy that I was like, oh, okay, now I get it. This is making sense. And what it really came down to was like, how do we create content that actually calls forward the right people? And what we mean by that is, so this particular topic that we're talking about, right? Like, it's still in your realm, your respective realms of marketing, content marketing, social media marketing, but not everyone maybe cares about repurposing a podcast or not repurposing a podcast. Maybe they don't even have a podcast, right? So how do you think, so not all of your followers or your whole audience is going to care about what it is that we're talking about today. So what we need to do is we need to call forward the right people, the people who actually will care about this. And that starts with the what Katie calls the awareness post, right? Like, how do you get people raising their hands to be like, oh my gosh, yes, I have this problem too. And the great thing about that, and you guys would both know this because you are deep in the social media space, is that engagement is actually what gets visibility, and it actually gets engagement is actually what gets your content in front of the same people, that is the people who engage, but also more of the right people like them, if that makes sense. So then it was like, so, okay, we get people to raise their hands, and then it's like, but then we want to give to them, right? We want to give them more value. So then the second post is like the elaboration post, which goes into, hey, here's a tip. We raise our hands. We all have this problem that we're struggling with. Here's something that either me or my guest has done and it's worked for them. And then the third post is all about community. This is where the human element comes in. This is the one that AI just cannot do, right? This is like, because AI at this stage cannot read your mind. It does not know your memories. And so this is where it's talking more about you and how either how you struggled with the problem, how you solved it, or even like how, you met the guest, because I love your story, Robin and Mike, how you guys met when Robin took you on a tour of Miami. But you could very well share that as part of your community post to be like, this is how Robin and I met, and I'm so glad that we get to, do this podcast together, and have these really great content marketing conversations together. This is where you really want to draw your audience into, hey, this is who I am. And, I have a puppy and I have kids and we love doing these things, just whatever. And I'll talk about how we actually do this. I just want to go through what the 4 posts are. And then the last one is then the actual action post, because through this journey, you've had people actually engaging with you, which is where now it makes sense when people are like, be social and social. I'm like, oh, I get it now. Like we're actually trying to create content that has people wanting to have conversations with us rather than creating content that's just a repurpose of a podcast, because all we want is to put something out there. Again, we're creating content for content's sake. Does that distinction make sense?
Yeah.
In terms of what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I like how you are drawing a distinction between just doing it to create posts and creating posts that have real value. And I also like that you're unintentionally saying we're not creating engagement posts just for the sake of engagement either. I see people do this all the time where they'll say, well, what do you think about Brussels sprouts? And that has nothing to do with their job, with their life. They may not even eat Brussels sprouts, but they're doing it because they know that's one of 10 questions that they were told. Yeah, ask these kinds of questions every once in a while to spike your engagement.
Yeah.
It's amazing. You said content, you talked about a couple of different things, so many things. The first one was content vomiting. And I'm like,
oh yeah.
Yes.
Why are we all doing this? We are. It is vomit. It's like nauseating at its finest. And so I love that you said that. But then you talked about content dripping. And can you talk to us a little bit more about that? Like, how do you do that? How do you make something that makes people want to watch this?
Yes. Okay, cool. So it really starts with, instead of, so the way, when I think about repurposing, this is what comes to mind, and you guys can jump in and be like, no, I think repurposing this thing. But repurposing to me, because this is how I used to do it, was like, okay, I have this 30-minute, podcast recording. I'm going to just find 30-second clips of something. Hopefully it's entertaining or interesting in some way, but I'm just going to find these clips. I'm going to put them out there. And that was me content vomiting, all over the internet. And then when I really stepped back and thought about it, I was like, well, no, I mean, okay, the podcast can still serve a purpose, and it serves a very, very important purpose, but it's not for that purpose. The purpose that it serves is it creates a topic of conversation, what we call a premise. And alongside that is, when I spoke about those 4 posts and, dripping out our content, we really want to be intentional. And this is, again, like, we're not creating content for content's sake. We're being really intentional about the outcome that we want. This is how we, because again, I said I was greedy. I want to get more clients. I want to get more listeners. I want to get, more people on my email list. So whatever that end action is, and there can only be one when you do this, as in 1 per week or 1 each time you do this this strategy. I always go, how do I align my topic or my premise with that action? My premise comes from the podcast, right? So even though I say don't repurpose your podcast, I mean that, but I also am not saying don't use your podcast episode at all. What I mean is, hey, you spoke about something. You spoke about it for a reason, right? Maybe it was because, let's take this topic as an example again. The reason could be you have a lot of podcasters in your audience, and they're also wondering what to do with the content that they're creating. And so we want to make sure that we get in front of the right people. This is why this works really well as well, because we want to call the right people forward. And so our whole premise, our topic is going to be based on this, which is, hey, over the week, we're going to be talking about why you should not be repurposing your podcast. Who here is repurposing a podcast, right? But the end action that you might want is, I don't know, maybe you have a lead magnet for podcasters, or maybe you just want them to listen to this podcast. That is you want more listeners on this podcast, right? Then what we'll do is we'll actually, according to that strategy, we'll actually go, all right, this is the premise. So that's step number 1. What is our premise? Our topic is going to be podcasters should not be repurposing. This is what they should be doing instead. And then this is our action, and we just basically drip out the content that gets us to that action. And it's all about calling the people forward to create that engagement, give to them. So it's like, this is what you should be doing instead. Let them in to be like, hey, I used to do this too. And, ever since I changed how it is that I approached content, and creating content and my podcast content, like these are the results maybe that I got, or, Mike, you can talk about how we met even, and hey, like Deirdre's going to actually share and then by the time the action posts come, which is like, by the way, did you know that we actually recorded a podcast on this exact topic with Deirdre, who I actually introduced to you in the last post? People are going to be like, I've been following you on this journey already. Like it becomes a no-brainer to want to then actually take that action. And so that's kind of, anyway, I could talk about this forever, but like, I'm so passionate about like, let's actually get really intentional with the content that we create.
Love it. Love it. Okay. I'm legit taking notes because everything that we've been doing with this show, with all the other podcasts that we have coming up, with my own podcast, getting tons and tons of ideas. So thank you for that. And if you're just tuning in, we're talking with Deirdre from Capsho about podcasting. We've got several more topics to talk about that are going to help you position your podcast and your brand. But before we get to that, have you ever been to the Eiffel Tower?
So I'm hanging out here in Paris. Behind me, the iconic Eiffel Tower, which got me on Google. I did a search. What are the top tower destinations in the world? Number 3, Big Ben. Number 2, the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And number 1, the Eiffel Tower. So you would always think I need to go to the Eiffel Tower. But the fact is, all 3 of those destinations are amazing experiences. So think of towers the way you would social media. What's the right social media fit for you? When I look at the price point and the top players in the space for what you get, the most enterprise features, there's 3 players. There's Hootsuite, there's Sprout Social, and there's Agorapulse. So why is Agorapulse the right tower for you? Well, it's funny you ask. So I went to G2 because it's all the user reviews. What do we get are 5 reasons that matter to you as a marketer. Number 1, it says that we actually are the easiest one to use of those 3. Number 2, we have the best support, and you know that support is what really drives the machine when you're really frustrated. Number 3, pricing for teams. All right, you got a team? You want pricing that's affordable, that doesn't keep nickel and diming you? Agorapulse. Number 4, product direction. You are passionate about your social media features and functions. We're number 1. And number 5, campaign optimization. Are your campaigns working? Can you make them better? You tell me. G2 says those 5 reasons are what make Agorapulse the right choice over Hootsuite, over Sprout Social. Think of us as the Eiffel Tower of social media. My name is Daryl. I'm with Agorapulse.
The Eiffel Tower of social media. For those who don't know, we're actually based in Paris. So there is that French connection to Agorapulse. But Deirdre, another concept that you talked about set around this idea of not just publishing show notes, but creating show notes funnels.
Oh,
Can you explain that?
Yes. So how long ago was it now? Probably about 12 months ago, I was speaking to one of our users, one of our Capshovians, Adam Lamb, and he was talking about how since he used Capsho's email and especially the subject lines, he was like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. Went from an average open rate of like 23% to something like 66% just from, testing Capsho's subject lines. But then he was like, but what I'm finding is that even though the email is all about getting people to listen to the podcast episode, I'm not really finding my listener numbers increasing. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Let's talk a little bit more about that. How are you getting people onto your email list? And he was like, well, on my website, I have a PDF checklist that people can opt into and get. And the more that I thought about that, the more that I was like, oh, I wonder. And I wanted to test this actually. I was like, the lead magnet was for a very specific purpose, which it needs to be, but it was delivered in a very specific way, i.e., it was written. And my brain started thinking to be like, are they the same people who actually want to listen to a podcast, right? Because not everyone is created equal. Just because we might love audio or video doesn't mean that all people do. And so I wanted to test this. So what I did was I tested with my own podcast first, because that's generally what we do. We always test with ourselves first. So I started, I was actually recording a guest interview with someone called Kevin Schmidlin, who's also like a podcast growth coach. And we were talking, and he mentioned, it was just like, you know how you said, Mike, I was like, I just flew by this. He did the same thing. He just like flew by this one thought that he had, and then just kept going. And then towards the end, because it was on my mind, and I was like, I need to ask him this. But what I did was I actually like ended the podcast episode, but the recording was still on. And I was like, hey, you mentioned this one thing that has been on my mind. Can you go deeper into what that actually, like how you do it? And so we recorded that, and it was like an extra 3 to 5 minutes. And what I decided to do was go, in the podcast episode, I actually, as my call to action, was like, and by the way, if you notice, Kevin mentioned this one thing that he didn't go into, and it was on my mind. So I actually asked him the question later. And if you want that bonus episode, bonus clip, I should say, go and get it in the show notes. And so people would opt in for that. And what I found was that what we were creating here was like listeners opting in for something that they would listen to. And then when we actually emailed them then about a new podcast episode, it was for them to listen. So you can sort of see, you know, what we were trying to do, which was like, how do we get the right audience in the right, on my list, doing the thing that I want them to do in the right medium, but through the right medium. And so that became what we call the show notes funnel, which is how do you actually, content honey trap someone into wanting to go to your show notes. And, you know, I have a whole system there, and actually opting in for the thing that you want them to opt into so that you can build your list and ultimately get them taking action. So that's what the show notes funnel became. And so what we started doing was, it was like, because content honey trap, really all that is creating curiosity. So throughout the episode, we would create curiosity about something. I would be like, hey, you can actually, like assuage that curiosity by going to the show notes and opting in for this thing. But even in the show notes, I was actually thinking about how do I create curiosity and have people wanting to come to the show notes. So I would actually embed rich media, things like photos and videos and pull out quotes, so people actually wanted to stay on the show notes and actually it led them into that action as well. So that's what the show notes funnel became.
She talked about honey trap, and I feel like we needed just a little bit more. You just like threw it out there. She like mic dropped honey trap, and I was like, oh, we need more. Can you tell us a little bit more about honey trap?
Yeah, for sure. So as I said, content honey trap in short is really about how we create curiosity. And when I tell you, we test everything on ourselves first, but it always comes from a spark of inspiration from somewhere. And I remember I was at this event, and it was one of those events that had like multiple stages. So you had to kind of look at the agenda and decide which one you wanted to go to. And there was a particular presentation that was titled "How I Made $1 Million with a $19 product and a toilet seat." And I was like, I don't know, like, and it was a packed room, by the way, so clearly it worked. And when I was going through this whole thing of like trying to think about how, because I knew my mentor was like, you've got to, we hear the word curiosity quite a lot. But I think where my brain always goes to is kind of like the, be social on social media. But it's like, what does that mean? It's like create curiosity, but it's like, what does that mean? And how do I do it? And so I started really nerding out on, how we create this curiosity. And when I saw that example, I was like, oh my gosh, okay, why did that make me so curious that I had to go to that presentation, right? And it was because there was this like almost like mind-blowing juxtaposition or paradox. You've got this like big result, $1 million, that a lot of us want or are striving for. And then we have this like $19 product and toilet seat, which almost is like when you try to wrap your head around, you're like, I don't know how that's possible, right? This is like this big gap that is getting called out, and there's so much curiosity about it. Well, how did this person close that gap? And so that became one of our mental models, one of our content honey trap mental models of how to create curiosity. How do you juxtapose this big result with this like almost unbelievable fact. So that became one of our like story-based content honey trap mental models. And then so the more that we really delved into, and there are some really typical ones like the cliffhanger, that, that's the reason why soap operas have been going on for decades, is because they have these cliffhangers that is based on the story. It's like, you need to know what happens next. And so we actually essentially created 8 mental models. In total, 4 that were based on stories, and then 4 that were based on the tips that were being shared. Because a lot of us, when we're, I'm like trying to swallow. When we're creating content, a lot of times we are sharing a lot of value. And so we start thinking about how it is that we actually create curiosity about the tips that we're sharing as well. So anyway, fast forward, I looked at this title, and I was like, I want to try it with one of our episodes. And I just recorded this podcast episode with this amazing woman, Angela Taylor, and she essentially she was operating a 5-figure coaching business, working only 40 hours a month, like not a week, a month. And so that's what I decided to create my, a paradox content honey trap around. It was like, that's how I promoted it. It's like how this woman, this coach, makes 5 figures working only 40 hours a month. And I posted on social media, and it was one of my highest engaging posts, but also one of my highest engaged podcast episodes. I had people DMing me being like, I cannot wait to listen to this episode. Like, it was crazy. And so that's when we knew that we were onto something around this, how to actually create curiosity via these 8 mental models.
Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating. Andrew Davis has an entire talk all about basically what you're talking about, the curiosity gap. And he shared this great example where, and some of you may have seen the rubber band around a watermelon experiment that BuzzFeed did so many years ago, just wrapping one rubber band around a watermelon. And they it went on for hours and hours and hours, and the watermelon slowly compressed, and people could not stop watching because they wanted to see, when will the watermelon explode? And then, of course, what that will look like. They wanted to sate that curiosity. And it's a tremendous approach to content. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Robin, do you have any other questions?
No, I'm kind of like, I've been taking notes the whole time. Like, everyone keeps seeing my eyes down. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll just take this. That's great. You're just like dropping amazing content and truth for both me and Mike. And especially nowadays, we don't want to be a noise. So
yes,
like, you don't like the content vomiting, the honey traps, like it's so important. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of
Absolutely.
course.
Yeah, I really seriously do have
Yeah, I'm like
all kinds of notes.
It's like a whole page here. Don't mind me. Keep talking. I think it's been amazing.
Yeah, that's when you know you've got a great guest, right? So I want to know more about Capsho in the sense of what's coming next. I mean, you kind of teased a little bit next gen. So now we've got this curiosity gap there. Next gen.
Yeah.
Wow, what's happening there? And it's just you and us. No one else
Yes.
is listening, so you don't have to worry about your product manager getting upset because you're sharing stuff that's not ready yet. Just tell us.
Yeah, Mike, that's great. That's so great. Lead her to that.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned that we're so close to actually launching Capsho Next Gen. And the way that we're launching it is, rather than going, hey, here's everything, because again, this is, we continue to learn from our mistakes. And what we found with the current version of Capsho is that it can be overwhelming. Like we thought by giving people all of this content, people would just know what it is that they wanted to use and then just cherry pick, right? But what we actually found was that people would look at this and be like, oh my gosh, I can be everywhere all the time, all at once right now. And which sounds really exciting, but is actually not, it's overwhelming, but it's also, that's actually what contributes to the content vomit. And so what we wanted to do was with Capsho Next Gen was we wanted to be really intentional with how we actually phased in each of the features. So what we're going to be launching with first in about 3 to 4 weeks time is going to be, it's going to be the title and description for anyone who has a podcast. But it's really going to be social media. And it's literally following the 4-post strategy that Katie Brinkley's 4-post social media strategy that I actually talked about, which is like your awareness post, your elaboration post, your community post, and your action post. That is actually what. So you do the same thing where you put your audio or video into Capsho, and given that content and the premise and the action that you want people to take, Capsho will actually do the first draft of each of those 4 posts. Actually, I should say 3.5, because a community post, we'll just prompt you through some things, but essentially the 4 posts for you, so that you actually start getting outcomes from your social media. But the great thing, the reason why we call it next gen, is because what you don't see is actually the intelligence that sits behind that. Like, yes, the strategy, but also it's going to be self-learning. So the more that you use it and edit inside the platform, the more that we'll actually be able to learn, your tone of voice, like how you like to structure your content, how you like to write, the common words that you like to use. Capsho will actually be able to learn that and apply that for content ongoing. And it also has this really cool editing feature that makes it really, really easy to leverage AI to help you edit as well for you. But that's what's coming like in the first release. And what we're doing is that, because we know that a tool in and of itself, can only get you so far. So we want to give you the training, the coaching, the community. So how people will actually access Capsho Next Gen is through Capsho Club, which is going to be at a ridiculous price, like founding member price. It's like literally 20% of what it's going to be. So you save 80% right now for being one of the first. It's insane. That's how we're launching Capsho Next Gen. And then what's coming is we're going to have YouTube description, like a thumbnail. We won't generate the image to begin with, but we'll definitely be recommending a really cool hook to put on your thumbnails, tags, things like that. And then we're going to be going into the SEO space with blog posts and LinkedIn articles and everything. So yeah, we're going to round out the content suite, but it's going to be in a really intentional way so that our Capshovians actually get results from their content.
I love that you mentioned Everywhere All at Once, because you've almost got this entire parallel going to Michelle Yeoh's film, right? Where if you imagined all of a sudden having the ability to be in different universes and different times and do different things and bring in different skills, that might sound really cool until you're totally overwhelmed to the point where you literally vomit.
Exactly. Yes. And we've all done that. I did that too. And it's not pretty.
No, it's not. So that sounds fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that. And this has been such a fun interview, Deirdre. Thank you so much. Tell folks where they can go to learn more about you and learn more about Capsho.
Yes. So for me, I'm primarily on Facebook or LinkedIn. So just Deirdre Tshien, which I know is the easiest name to remember and spell and search for. But DeirdreTshien, I'm sure that'll be in the show notes as well. And if you want to be a founding member of Capsho Club, so if you're an entrepreneur and you're actually looking to get results from the content that you create, i.e. get more clients, then I want to invite you to be a founding member of Capsho Club. Right now we have a wait list. So that's at capsho.com/club. And very, very soon we'll actually open that up for our founding members to actually get in and start doing some really cool things with our content.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And that's all we've got for today, friends. Don't forget to continue to have that conversation in our Social Media Pulse community. And the podcast is going to be coming out very, very soon. So if you're listening to the podcast, please rate and leave us a review. Any final thoughts, Robin?
No, I think if you haven't been paying attention, she said first release. So eyeballs went like this. There's way more to come. So thank you so much for coming on the show and telling us this.
Yes,
Awesome.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, everybody. Until next time. Thank you for listening to another episode of The MarTech Show, hosted by Robin Diamond and Mike Alton, powered by Agorapulse, the #1 rated social media management solution, which you can learn more about at agorapulse.com. If you want to make sure you're part of our audience during live weekly broadcasts, take a look at our calendar at agorapulse.com/calendar, or click the subscribe button in your email once you register for any of these events. Is there a particular tool or topic you'd like to see us talk about? Or perhaps you think your solution should be featured? email me at mike@agorapulse.com.